Hello, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to Satsang. Satsang is an ancient spiritual practice from India. It means being in reality together. I give Satsang live every Wednesday and Sunday night in Portland, Maine. This Dharma talk was recorded during one of our Wednesday night gatherings. Please visit jayakula.org to learn more about the teachings. You can find video satsangs on Jayakula's YouTube channel, and my books are all available on Amazon.com. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. There are two corollary teachings in the Bhagavad Gita that are really core to the entire teaching. And Bhagavad Gita is a teaching of Lord Krishna to his devotee Arjuna, the spiritual warrior. And one of the lessons that Krishna gives Arjuna is that we have to act, that as human beings, or just simply as embodied creatures, we don't have the choice not to act. Even through inaction, we're acting. And so he's trying to let Arjuna know that simply refusing to act doesn't really get him anywhere. And then the teaching that's related to that in the Bhagavad Gita is once we do act, we let go of the result. We are in an infinite constellation of actions and actors. We do something and something is set in motion, and we really don't have very much control over what is going to be the result of our actions. And so we act understanding that there's an infinite set of possibilities for the result of that action, and we try to let go of our attachment to things being a particular way. So this is from chapter 18 of the Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna is talking about three kinds of action. And it's interesting because this is a Kashmiri version of the Bhagavad Gita. There isn't just one version. So this actually is a slightly different version of the Bhagavad Gita. I don't know exactly how it was produced, but it has more of an emphasis on the yogic meaning of the Bhagavad Gita. It's more explicit that what the Bhagavad Gita is talking about is not a literal battle, but actually a spiritual battle. And it's also more inclusive of some of the view of Trika Shaivism or Kashmir Shaivism. So you may have heard, if you take yoga classes or have studied any of Patanjali's yoga, you may have heard of the three gunas, some called Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. And in Patanjali's yoga and more mainstream, conventional, and I would say even thoughtless interpretations of Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, there's a very moralistic cast to interpreting these qualities. The word guna means quality, and Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva are said to be three qualities of a person. And tamas is basically interpreted as lethargy or sloth or inertia or stagnation. Rajas is interpreted as more frenetic activity, usually something to do with anger. And sattva is interpreted as like a peaceful, more spiritual, more holy way to be in the world. And when you hear pundits talk about these three gunas, which are really not taught in the Kashmiri tradition proper, we talk about the 20 gunas, which are just simply qualities of things, like cold and hot and dry and liquid and things like that, that have absolutely no moralistic portent whatsoever. So when I was learning about Trika Shaivism, we really never even mentioned Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. It just wasn't part of the teaching. But it is in the Bhagavad Gita, and so in this Kashmiri version of the Bhagavad Gita, there is a kind of Trika Shaivite reinterpretation of the three gunas, which I found to be interesting. They're talked about in this version of the Bhagavad Gita as the three kinds of activity one can engage in. And what you'll notice, what's really interesting, is that there's no moralistic view here. There's no thought that one form of activity is less spiritual or less holy or lesser or greater. It's really more based on what is a more ignorant or limited way of acting and what is a more expansive, inclusive of awake, aware Shiva consciousness way of acting. It's simply along that continuum. It's not along the continuum of, sinful to holy, which is what you normally read in kind of texts that are going a more mainstream way. So here, tamas is interpreted this way. When tamas action or activity or karma is the word for activity, is unskillful and undisciplined. So when we are acting in a tamasic way, according to this version, we are simply being unskillful and undisciplined. We're dogmatic and unwilling to be taught or unwilling to seek assistance, relying on one's own ignorance. So tamas, even in the more conventional texts, is a state of stagnation. And it's also, could be related to the animal realm for those of you that have studied the 6 realms with me or elsewhere. It has that quality of stubbornness and kind of relying on yourself in a kind of stupidly independent way. So that you don't ask for help when you need it, and you just kind of believe that anything you think is right. There are people like that. Anything that comes into their heads, they think that must be right. Tamas here means a kind of stubbornness and inner rigidity and dogmatism that is the result of being ignorant of your actual condition. You think your ignorance is wisdom. That's basically the definition of tamas in this rendition of the Bhagavad Gita. And then rajas, or rajasic activity, rajasic karma, is more active in an outward way. It's defined here as craving and longing for the fruit of action, passionate and greedy to the point of violence, happy in success and grief-stricken in failure. So this could be more of a Titan kind of an attitude, right? So in the rajasic attitude is very much attached to the outcome of one's actions and being passionate and greedy on behalf of small self. Being greedy for God and passionate about God is one thing. But this kind of greed and passionateness is a form of ahimsa, of himsa, of violence, not ahimsa, towards oneself and towards other people. Because you're acting as you're trying to magnetize the things that you want, the outcomes that you want, and you're very active in doing so and manipulating situations and being passionate and greedy about getting what you want and rejecting what you don't want. So those are the 2 kinds of actions that are defined in the Bhagavad Gita that are extremely limited forms of action. Kind of digging your heels in and just insisting that your way of seeing and your way of doing and your way of being is the way. And then the other form of rajasic activity, which is kind of going for broke, just trying to get what you want and everybody else be damned. Then sattva, the word sat means reality or existence itself, and sattva means being aware of reality, understanding what is real, being in touch with essence nature. Sometimes you see in text, in fact, often you see the word sat, which is S-A-T, so the short A in Sanskrit is like so it's pronounced sat. Sometimes I get emails from people, I really enjoyed satsang, spelled S-U-T, but it's actually S-A-T. Anyway, Sometimes you see that word sat translated as truth. This is actually a mistranslation. Whenever you see the word truth in an old text translation or some old teachings translation, you can just substitute the word reality or existence, and you'll be much more in line with what that word actually means. So this is really interesting, what sattva is, according to the Kashmiri rendition of the Bhagavad Gita. Liberated from samsara, the wheel of suffering, or what those of you who have studied six realms, you know as the bhava chakra, the wheel of the different orientations of limited beings, the different feeling orientations we can possibly get stuck in as limited beings. So sattva is liberated from samsara and self-referencing speech. Isn't that interesting? All of the constant referencing of our small self, liberated from that compulsion to be constantly referencing yourself and talking about yourself and consolidating that sense of self through compulsive speech. Ma was always saying, if someone asked her about herself, she would say, "Leave me out of it." I feel that more and more when I'm just out and about in the world. I talk about myself here in teachings to say things that will be helpful to you all. But when I'm just out and about, like today I went to the dentist and they're trying to form relationships with you, at the dentist. So they were just starting to ask me these questions about myself. And I just finally said, I really don't want to talk about myself. Just get on with the tooth. I have to find a more graceful way of doing that. Because it happens at the hairdresser, too, and it drives me nuts. Just so boring to talk about myself. You love to talk about yourself at the hairdresser?
The hairdressers love to talk to you.
Yeah. I think you have to be that way to be a hairdresser. So sattva means you're liberated from samsara and self-referencing speech, courageous and easygoing. I love that combination. So courageous and easygoing in the face of success or failure, remaining unperturbed. I read the whole thing all at once. Liberated from samsara and self-referencing speech, courageous and easygoing in the face of success or failure, remaining the same, unperturbed. So understanding that phenomenon have equality, so you can be easygoing. You can remain unperturbed because you understand that success and failure are really, in terms of sat, in terms of existence, they're the same. Right? They're just expressions of the one consciousness, and they have equality, just like a painting of disaster and a painting of a puppy are both just paintings. Right? We don't get upset when we see a painting of a disaster and go, "No, bring back the puppy painting." But that's what we do in life, because we mistake this for something that it is not. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, you can kind of see some of the roots of the six realms in this teaching. The six realms are a teaching. Has everybody here taken Foundation Snow? About the six basic flavors in which human beings lose touch with essence nature. And those teachings came out of the Indian tradition, but they were really formalized in Buddhist traditions. And so to find them in Indian traditions is sort of, they just pop up here and there. They're not actually, you can't go to one place in the Indian tradition and find a teaching on the six realms. Okay, I'm going to stop there. And I think this is useful when we think about our own activity in the world, and especially the difference between feeling separate and digging in your heels, and that way, or feeling separate and being very aggressive toward the world. There's kind of a rigidity and inertia and stagnation form of activity. You might even think of that as inactivity, but it's not. Just sort of the attempt to just hold your ground, basically, is what Tamas is being described as. Whereas Rajas is kind of like going out and aggressing on the world, trying to get what you want. And of course, anybody can be exhibiting both of those things. The person whose activity is sattva does what's called walk in the sandhi. So the sandhi means a gap. So when you're not being so perturbed by success and failure, there's a feeling of spaciousness, that you can kind of walk through life unscathed. And that feeling is called walking in the sandhi, walking between, in a space of non-reactivity. And in fact, it's even said to be walking in the sandhi is that walk which creates no new karma. When you're not being reactive to things, when you're not trying to get anything or push anything away, when you're in a state of total non-struggle with reality, then in a sense you become invisible. You don't attract any new entanglements. This is a kind of situation that's described as invisibility, both in the Taoist and the Tibetan traditions and in the Indian tradition. Because nothing is sticking to you. And in fact, there's lots of stories, especially in the Chinese traditions of direct realization traditions, of great masters who could actually be invisible, who could walk through crowds of people and no one would see them, because they were in such a state of relaxation and non-struggle that there was just nothing moving out toward other people for them to recognize. I don't know if that's really true, but certainly if you're quiet inside, you do attract less entanglement. That for sure is true. Jayakula is a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. We are based in Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon. Visit jayakula.org to explore more of our offerings.